Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name's Renee LaValle McKenna, and I bring my 30-plus years as a recovering addict and ex-crazy person turned therapist and shamanic healer to bring you snackable teachings on spirituality, psychology, and all things personal growth. And today I want to talk about the great paradox of human life. And a paradox is a statement or a situation that appears contradictory or maybe even absurd, but in reality expresses a deeper truth or reveals a more complete understanding of something. And I've had a couple of big paradoxes in my life, the first of which is how the darkness of addiction brought me to the light of recovery. But the most recent paradox, perhaps the most surprising, actually realized the other morning when I was just waking up, it literally had me sit up in bed, is that Donald Trump is perhaps the single most positive catalyst in my life in the last 10 years. And I'm a liberal. I live in the liberal bubbles of San Francisco, Manhattan, and recently spending a lot of time in Los Angeles. So I'm surrounded by primarily other liberal people, many of whom are extremely distressed about what's been happening politically with Trump and Elon Musk and Project 2025, the conservative blueprint that seems to be the playbook that's running the executive office right now. And the main principle that I have been practicing and actively counseling others to use is to focus on our sphere of influence rather than our sphere of concern. And this is the concept of being proactive, focusing on where we have power rather than just being reactive, which often leaves us feeling powerless. In its simplest form, the serenity prayer of God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference, is a simple but incredibly profound approach to life. To be rooted in serenity, acceptance, courage, positive action, growing in wisdom. And I did a whole podcast on this concept, number 232, Be Proactive, part of my series on the 7 habits of highly effective people. This is part of the great truth that we are all part of a larger system. We all have a role to play in it. And when we focus on being proactive, use our time and our energy in positive, constructive ways in our own life, in our sphere of influence, rather than being drained by fear, anxiety, powerlessness, or victimization of things we can't change. It's a better use of our time, our energy. It certainly makes us feel better when I'm in serenity, courage, and wisdom, rather than being in turmoil, anxiety, and ignorance. And when I focus my energy and attention on what I can do, create, or be in the world, I become an agent for positive change. I am part, we are all part, an important and intrinsic part of this larger consciousness system. In fact, feeling separate from it is a great misunderstanding and the root of probably almost all human suffering. And when we can engage and play our little part, it is absolutely the most important thing we can do to create positive change, which points to another paradox that if I want to change the world, I need to change myself. And I know I've spent a lot of time in my life believing that if you were different, I would be better. But we are actually not separate on the deepest levels, and that is where change happens. If I focus on what's wrong with you or them, it often just justifies my own ego position. I feel powerless, judgmental, fearful, or victimized. And when I focus on changing myself, because we are all connected, those self-changes or self-growth is actually the only thing that brings real change into a system. And it's very easy to get caught in this us and them separation, but it's an illusion. There is no them. There's only us and we. And so the realization recently that Donald Trump has been, again, perhaps the single most positive, generative force in my life, particularly professionally, is quite a mind-blowing paradox. And there's kind of a long story of how that has unfolded, but I'm going to tell it. So I'm not a political person. Politics are human-created structures that are necessary, but I'm much more interested in the underlying spiritual structures because my experience is creating change at the root has much more impact than messing around with more superficial, transient structures. It's all necessary, it's just not my sphere of influence. But I was watching the 2016 election. At that point, I was a full-time mom, a Girl Scout leader, an art teacher, and a part-time therapist. And I'm a very sensitive, empathic person. And as I watched the election results, I could feel the collective angst as this divisive, hateful, selfish, narcissistic media whore became our president. And I couldn't sleep that night. And when the results were final, I began to pray, show me how to be helpful. Just a little mommy living in the Sunset District of San Francisco, but if there's something I can do, show me what it is. I want to be a positive force in the world. And I was on Facebook a lot at that moment, and somebody posted that they were going to do a march in Washington, D.C. on Inauguration weekend. And I immediately knew I wanted to go. I asked my husband at the time, do we have any plans in January? He said, no, go ahead. And so I posted about it on my own page, and I got like 50 responses in about 30 minutes. People wanted to know about it. I want to go. How do we do this? And I love to organize things. And so I started to poke around and try to get more information. And more people kept querying me. Now I'm up over 100 people interested in going. There's momentum happening here. I could feel it. So I'm looking at buses and airplanes. How would we all get down there? Be fun to all ride together. How can I help organize? Make it easy for people to get to this thing in Washington. Felt very positive and exciting. And I created a Facebook page. I didn't even know enough about Facebook. Do I make a group, a page? I don't know. I just made a Facebook page. I think at that point they were calling it the Million Woman March or something. And when I woke up the next morning, over 1,000 people had joined my page and growing. And I didn't know what I was doing. And later that day, somebody messaged me and said, who are you and why did you make this page? And I told them, I'm just trying to be helpful. And they said, well, let's get some coffee. And I met with this woman in San Francisco, and she was completely overwhelmed. There was this kind of viral thing happening. She said, this is way too much for me. Would you be willing to be the organizer for San Francisco? Because it looks like people are going to break up these marches into different cities. And I knew at that moment that that was the answer to my prayer of how I could be helpful. And so I said, sure, having no idea what I was signing up for. And the next day, I was on the front page of the San Francisco Chronicle as lead of Women's March 2017. And I won't go into all the details of how intense it is to organize a massive march in like 8 weeks. But I became the head of an amazing team of 20 women and part of the Bay Area team because there were marches in Oakland, San Francisco, and San Jose. We were connected with Los Angeles, and ultimately we got connected with march leaders all across the country. It was a really powerful, life-changing experience. Pink pussy hats, funny signs, trying to include every demographic that it felt like the Trump administration was trying to outlaw. And the march itself was one of the most inspiring and positive experiences I've ever had. It was the best of humanity, generosity, kindness. People brought raincoats to share, extra umbrellas, snacks. We created the antithesis of the tone of Donald Trump at that time. And after the march, there was a lot of discussion about what to do, but I'm not a political person. And I felt like I had done what I could. And I stayed with the organization for a couple months and then turned the leadership over to somebody else. And I have to say, I was pretty exhausted. So I kind of went dark for a couple months. But I continued that prayer of, how can I be helpful? Which is an excellent prayer if you don't know what else to ask for, because being of service is probably the most positive, empowered place that we can be in any circumstance. Moves us out of selfishness and into selflessness. And for me, less self is always better. In 12-step recovery, we ask often to be relieved of the bondage of self. That's our little ego self, and to be an agent for God or Goddess's will or the highest good. universal wisdom, whatever words work for you. And so in that time of prayer and contemplation, after having been kind of pulled to the front of the class with a bunch of big girls, I realized that there was a possibility that my sphere of influence might be larger than just my phone book. I guess it's my contact list because no one has a phone book anymore. But as I contemplated the influence I would like to have, I came to the conclusion that Donald Trump is a product of our culture. He's the symptom, not the problem. And the culture is the culmination of all of the individuals within it. It's not an external thing imposed upon us. It is something generated from within us. And that our culture is immature and misguided. I know because of my own immaturity and misguidance. And so for me, if you want to change the culture to help it to mature and evolve, the best way to do that would be to help the individual people within it mature and evolve. And I have an overflowing toolbox to help people to do that with my spiritual psychology work. And it became obvious that how I could be helpful would be to write a book. And so I spent 3 years writing my book, Allies and Demons, working with spirit for power and healing, creating an audio program for people to actually do this incredibly transformative work that so changed my life in a way that was accessible and affordable for people that couldn't see me one-on-one. And if you self-publish a book, then you have to let people know it exists. And as I started to learn about social media and marketing, it was suggested to create one type of content and to be consistent with it over time. And so I thought, I know how to talk. Why don't I start a podcast? And so in 2018, I started this podcast. And through the podcast, I've had amazing people come to me from all over the world. And this woman reached out to me from Paris in the winter of 2020, said her father had just passed away, and she was really interested in spiritual psychology, and she liked my podcast a lot. Could we talk? So we had a really connected and interesting phone call that started a very deep relationship that continues to this day. And she said, I think you should bring this work to even more people. Maybe you should even start a mentorship program. You might want to get onto YouTube. And so that began a whole new series of content creation and a vision of bringing this work to all who need it. And that has brought me to where I am today with a ton of really quality, low-cost, and free content for people to be able to access the spiritual psychology work themselves. I became a teacher on Insight Timer, developed a series of digital courses, which brings us to where I am today, in a new round of asking that question, how can I be helpful? And all of the things that have been created and all of the people that have been helped by this work, I can trace back directly to the election of Donald Trump. And that is a great paradox. So I hope that wasn't too self-indulgent. In fact, I hope that it was helpful. And thank you so much for listening. Blessings on your path until we meet again. This is Renee LaValle McKenna for Spiritual Psychology.